I cannot shirk the obligation to do an in-depth analysis of the factors that will impact the future and to sketch out the possible scenarios, to assess possibilities and probabilities, to try to understand the opportunities and the enemy's rationale and possible modus operandi, and to try to think what our forces will do and to create the intelligence tools that will make it possible to pose the right policy vis-a-vis the enemy and to create a policy that will impact the one in whose favor time is working. And if, heaven forfend, there is a war, to make sure that we have the intelligence data that will enable us to win that war. This conference is being held in the shadow of the events in Egypt. I'm sure we'll get back to that in the panel. But when we take off to 40,000 feet in the Middle East, the most influential factors in the Middle East are still stronger than what's happening in Egypt, and we still don't fully understand how the events in Egypt will impact the struggle, the clash of civilizations, between values, between regimes in the Middle East in the past decade. Between the camp that is led by Iran, the camp that is called the radical camp, and the Western-leaning camp that is led to a large extent by remote control by the United States, and whose members include Israel, Egypt, and other pragmatic regimes. And when I look at these two camps, the Iranian camp versus the camp that we belong to, this is a clash of civilizations, of philosophies, of cultures, between political regimes, between the belief of how a country should be run and what need to be the principal norms and values and behavior in that country. And I can say to you that in the from 5 years of observing in depth this camp, I can say that this is not propaganda. This is definitely a strong original conviction that they believe that history is with them. They believe that their system is the better one, is more just, and ultimately that they will win. And they look at us, at the people who've come from the West, at the Judeo-Christian culture, the democratic culture that believes in the market economy and all the values that I cannot enumerate for lack of time. They think that that is a declining civilization, a declining culture of pampered, spoiled people who are unwilling to sacrifice themselves, for whom the standard of living is the most important value. And as far as they are concerned, not in the next quarter, not in the coming year, not even in the next term of this or that ruler, they believe that they will prevail. In their view, they have found the weak spot of Israel and the West. And they plan, and they are preparing for the next confrontation and are preparing to hit those weak points, not weak point, but weak points. They will achieve counter-deterrence, whether by means of WMD or through massive firepower that will hit the most, where it hurts the most, the day-to-day life economy by means of ballistic weapons of various types. They will try to neutralize that which has enabled the Americans and Israelis to be victorious in military campaigns in the last 20 years. The amazing combination of precision intelligence and precision weapons. And they will do this by going underground, by entering populated areas, urban areas, by camouflaging themselves and through deceit. The Iranians want to get the nuclear bomb on the safest path possible. redundant. And in the most redundant way and legitimate way possible. And that is why the Iranians are moving ahead on nuclearization broadly, not narrowly, slowly, gradually, certainly, and legitimately.
The major aim of Israel in the Middle East is to achieve peace. And we have achieved peace with Egypt, with the largest Arab country, 30 years ago. This has been not just peace between Israel and Egypt. Jordan later joined it. But it created a new situation in the Middle East, which made the outbreak of a major war between Israel and any Arab state almost non-describable. And the fact is that since we have had 30 years of peace with Egypt, there has not been a major war in the Middle East. There were Israeli wars against, in Lebanon, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., but not a major war. And this has been the major asset of what have been the hopes and the dreams of the Israeli people, Israeli leadership, regardless of political views and regardless of existing disagreements, which we do have about how to achieve peace with the Palestinians. I think Israel has made a major mistake, and I understand why it happened when it happened, of not adequately at that time responding to the Arab League Beirut peace offer. Because you haven't heard the end of my sentence, so don't plan. No. I know where you stand, and I agree with you, but you know. Now, what should Israel have said then, and I think it still has to do now? The Beirut Peace Initiative was a major breakthrough because for the first time we had a clear statement based on Arab consensus, and the Arab League works by consensus, which is not always very easy, that envisages a situation of peace with Israel. After Khartoum and the 3 no's of Khartoum and the history of the Arab League, even after Sadat's visit to Jerusalem, the Arab League boycotted Egypt, got out of Egypt, went to Tunis, excommunicated Egypt. This is a major step forward for Israel because for the first time we have a legitimate Arab consensus considering the possibility of peace with Israel. And we should have welcomed it. However, the initiative itself does not call for negotiations with Israel. It says that Israel should accept a Palestinian state, Israel should accept a solution to the refugee problem, and Israel should withdraw to 1967 lines. And then the Beirut Initiative says, after Israel doing this, the Arab League, Arab countries will normalize relations with Israel. Now, this is not an offer for negotiations. This is saying to Israel, accept the Palestinian Arab demands, and then everything will be fine, or we'll see. Now, Israel should welcome that initiative and say that we are ready to negotiate all those issues which are raised, but they have to be negotiated. Because in the Arab Peace Initiative, the word negotiations with Israel does not appear. And I suggest to all of us to reread the text. It says, peace, which is wonderful, this is great, but the conditions for peace are if Israel accepts the Palestinian position, not negotiations. We have now to start an initiative responding to that initiative because we know the Palestinians cannot really move if they do not have an Arab, a pan-Arab and all-Arab support, and after what's happening in Egypt, it is even more necessary. It will also be tested to the new Egyptian government. We have to call on the Arab League to negotiate with Israel on the positions which they have put forward. We will have our positions. Let's have a negotiations. Let's have a negotiation between the Arab League and Israel. Let's have a negotiation between delegations of the Arab League and Israel. Because at the moment it looks as if the Arabs have offered peace. They did offer peace, but they did not offer negotiations. And it appears that Israel has said no. It was a mistake at that time. It can still be corrected. It may be a game changer. It may move from the stalemate of what is happening between us and the Palestinians, which is nothing, and it may bring back negotiations between us, or relations between us and the Arab countries, to where they should be.